Greetings and salutations. Today we will be covering the case of the mysterious murder of Chaim Weiss and the strange happenstance that surround this case. On the chilling autumn day of November 1st, 1986, a seasoned investigator by the name of Daly received a distressing dispatch. He was summoned to a yeshiva nestled in the heart of Long Beach, New York, and thrust into the depths of an enigmatic murder that would come to baffle even a veteran of his caliber. The victim, a young soul by the name of Chaim Weiss, had met his gruesome demise at the tender age of 16. What confronted Detective Daly upon arriving at this harrowing scene, you may ask? The young boy had been slain with a single precise blow, which had fractured his skull and severed his spinal column, leaving behind an unsettling puzzle. There was a conspicuous absence of any trace of a murder weapon, and no trace or detail that would point to what had been the weapon that inflicted such brutality upon the young man. As Detective Daly delved deeper into the perplexing case, he discovered an eerie void where answers should have been. There were no telltale signs of a robbery, no disarray suggesting a struggle or violence. Instead, there was an uncanny silence that shrouded the yeshiva, accentuated by the fact that this grim discovery had unfolded on a Saturday, the sacred day of the Sabbath. The detectives quickly realized that there would be some issues arising due to the involvement of the Orthodox Jewish community, as communication presented a formidable obstacle. When Daly and his team arrived at the scene, the clock had just struck 8 in the morning, and the faithful adherents were unable to engage in written dialogue. As silence hung heavy in the air, a palpable tension made extracting witness statements a rather arduous task. It quickly became evident that fear and resistance cast their shadows upon the students and inhabitants of the yeshiva. The very walls of the institution seemed to bear witness to the secrets untold. A wary reluctance to speak to law enforcement added another layer of complexity to an already difficult case. As Detective Daly embarked on what would become a career-defining investigation, he knew that the enigma would test his skills and intuition like none other before. The case of young Weiss had all the makings of an unsolved mystery that would haunt him, challenging his 25 years of experience in the relentless pursuit of the truth. In the relatively quiet town of Long Beach, New York, a sinister enigma would grip the hearts of a tight-knit community. 15-year-old Chaim Weiss, born into a lineage of refugees who fled from the horrors of the Second World War, lived a life deeply rooted in the traditions of Jewish orthodoxy. He was the eldest of Anton and Pessi Weiss. Their legacy was entrusted to him and his two younger siblings, as they practiced the rites, rituals, and beliefs of Orthodox Judaism. The victim's life revolved around his education. His high school was a sanctum of Orthodox Judaism, located in Long Beach. It was a place where the echoes of tradition reverberated through the halls, where prayers and adherence to the timeless moral codes of his faith were not merely obligations but a way of life, a place of profound significance to a select few. This high school was more than just an institution. It was a haven for those who cherished the customs of their ancestors, a refuge where the teachings of Moses found resonance within the hearts of students. This story takes its first chilling sojourn on the morning of Saturday, November 1st, 1986, when Detective Daly, a seasoned investigator with the Nassau County Police Department, found himself on a path that he had not foreseen. At 8 a.m., a call dispatched him to Torah High School dormitory, a seemingly tranquil abode that housed Chaim Weiss and approximately 4 other students. There within the confines of the sacred sanctuary lay the lifeless body of Weiss, a grim tableau of violence in a place that should have had peace reign. The narrative unfolded like a cryptic riddle, with each detail casting a long shadow of intrigue. Chaim's mother seemed to challenge not only the principles of justice, but also the very fabric of the tight-knit Orthodox Jewish community that they resided in. It beckoned Detective Daly to unravel the mystery of her child's murder. Once the investigation had started, the clock was ticking. With each passing moment wasted, the chances of finding the culprit began to dwindle. As investigators delved deeper into the haunting Halloween homicide, cryptic clues and the tenuous timeline were combined in order to better investigate the case. At 7:30 a.m. on that fateful Saturday morning, a dormitory supervisor entered Chaim's room, a place where he should have been preparing for his sacred Saturday morning prayers. But instead he was met with a gruesome scene, which defied the norms and any explanation. Chaim's lifeless body lay there, still clad in his pajamas, his upper half slumped over the bed, the grotesque outcome of a single piercing blow to his skull. Eventually, an autopsy would find out that the instrument used to murder the young man was likely a hatchet. The sheer force of the blow apparently was so vicious that it crushed parts of the skull. This bore the hallmarks of a rather violent slaying. However, the lack of signs of a struggle meant the victim was likely caught unawares, or potentially even asleep. However, it seems that he had suffered from not one, but two fatal strikes. In essence, the first blow had not been the crescendo of this violent act, but the prelude. Even with this, the exact hatchet-like weapon used remained elusive. In the aftermath of this gruesome act, the victim's lifeless body had been moved from his bed to the floor, and the window stood ajar, a chilling detail that some have connected to ancient customs and rituals. The last glimmer of the victim's life was witnessed by a study partner around 12:45 a.m. on that fateful Saturday morning, a fleeting moment of existence before darkness descended on the young boy's fate. Chaim's parents at the time resided on Staten Island and were only informed of their son's untimely demise at the end of Shabbat. This was a cruel delay for the family, which compounded the agony of loss. Shortly after this, the community was bound together in faith and grief as thousands of mourners paid their respect at the Weiss's funeral service, held in the Borough Park section of Brooklyn. As the sun set on that fateful day in 1986, Detective Don Daly would begin to interview multiple suspects, and police would eventually polygraph over 40 students and several of the school's teachers and rabbis in an attempt to ascertain any information that they could, while the memories of the times surrounding the event would still be fresh. At the start of the investigation, Detective Daly was met with almost complete and utter silence, and this was primarily because it was the Sabbath, a day when this particular sect of Orthodox Jews would abstain from anything including writing, communication, and a litany of other activities. This meant that statements could not be directly taken that day, and answers would remain out of reach. It eventually became clear that a shroud of hesitance and apprehension enveloped those within the Yeshiva. Students and officials alike seemed reticent, their voices stifled by a potent blend of shyness and fear, which had taken root within the community, and it became a daunting barrier in uncovering the truth. However, the room where Chaim met his untimely end was still accessible to the detectives, and it spoke of a killer well versed in Yeshiva customs. This was due to evidence indicating that the victim had been murdered in his slumber and his life taken in an act of violence, yet his body had been moved from his final resting place prior to detectives finding it. Not once, but twice. The first from the bed to the floor, and later to a spot 2 feet away. An autopsy would later reveal that the victim's body had lain in bed for hours before its grotesque relocation, and during said autopsy, a chilling detail would emerge. It was evidenced by the condition of the body that the window had been left open wide the entirety of the chilling Halloween night. A detail that might have seemed inconsequential at first, but would speak volumes later. In the quest for answers, detectives were led to a profound understanding of particular Orthodox Jewish customs, specifically those practiced by the community. The window or door being opened was part of a custom that believed it allowed a release of the spirit of the departed, a belief which was millennia old, and the body had to be placed in the lowest, coolest point of the room, specifically the floor, as opposed to the bed where the victim was originally slain. This would mean that the individual who killed Chaim likely had a close connection with the community itself and was extremely well versed in these practices. But the question was, what compelled him to take part in this macabre tradition? The question of whether the person who moved the body was even connected to the slaying can be raised. However, seeing as it was verified that the individual who found the body had not moved it, and said individual was the one to contact the authorities, led to this being an unpopular proposition and an unlikely theory. Yet another curious occurrence occurred when one of the rabbis sought to honor the victim's memory by placing a memorial candle in his room. Said candle was intended to burn for 7 days, a somber gesture of both sympathy and faith. However, as the crime scene was sealed and the students had been evacuated from the dormitory, a new twist manifested. After this candle had been placed, 2 days would pass before a second candle had materialized. This one, it seemed, belonged to no one within the yeshiva, and it was believed that this was potentially placed as a mocking gesture or a gesture of repentance by the individual who slayed Chaim Weiss. Chaim's mother was known to have held her son close to her heart. Her anxiety was a testament to the love and concern any parent would bear for their child. It was noted that she had been worried about him living so far away from home, the separation causing a palpable tension within the family. While some of Chaim's peers ventured into the yeshivas in distant states, his parents harbored a fervent desire for him to remain in the New York area, preferably close by their protective embrace. In fact, the thought of him leaving home was something they wished to avoid altogether. However, the victim possessed a burning determination, a belief that within the halls of the yeshiva he desired to go to was where he would truly shine, and he would grow to cherish the camaraderie of his fellow students and the promise of the academic excellence that this learning institution provided. In the autumn of 1986, Chaim had spent 3 weeks home in a brief respite for Yom Kippur. It was at this time when his family had a reunion and celebration. This was a fleeting moment when bonds of kinship could be rekindled. Yet on his return to the yeshiva on Tuesday, October 28th, a strange silence descended. Unbeknownst to his family, he would not reach out to them, as was his customary routine on both Wednesday and Thursday. On Halloween, October 31st, 1986, a dark shadow was cast over his life. As Halloween coincided with the Jewish Sabbath, there was a convergence of two worlds, each steeped in their own traditions. In the late afternoon, Chaim, like so many of his peers, left classes to attend religious services. Yet he would never return to the dormitory in a manner where his friends would see him. Several hours later, two of his classmates would see him in the hallways, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the light in the otherwise dim corridor. Detective Daly would note that this was a common sight amongst the students, as their religious beliefs precluded turning off the lights in this area during particular hours. In the absence of the artificial illumination, the main hallway would remain bathed in scant lighting, providing a sanctuary for reading and contemplation, which in theory could have hidden a malicious entity just out of the purview of the students who had seen the victim. The last time Chaim was verifiably seen alive was at 1 a.m., and he was noted to be a solitary figure immersed in his reading within the hallway, which at the time was a dimly lit corridor often used as a haven for students during the hours when turning lights on or off was prohibited. And it must be noted that Chaim was one of the only two students who lacked a roommate at the time, meaning he would be uniquely vulnerable due to being a solitary figure in a seemingly secure space. The fact that there was one stairwell, which was a relatively clandestine path leading directly from the ground floor exit to Chaim's room, gave any potential killer an avenue of ingress. However, it must be noted that if someone had traveled through said main stairwell, they would have passed by several other rooms, each occupied by several students. However, no student reported hearing anything out of the ordinary, be they cries for help, an individual rushing through the hall after hours, screams of terror, or even having seen or noted anyone out of the ordinary. However, amidst this silence, a singular student recalled a peculiar occurrence. He claimed to have had his door open and quickly close that night. At the time, he had brushed it off as his roommate attempting to return for some unforeseen reason. Yet investigators would consider this a potential lead. leading to Detective Daly's decision to call a meeting and a gathering of students, teachers, and rabbis. This is where he would polygraph a large number of them, with the belief that someone within the Yeshiva held the key to unlock the mysteries that gripped the case. However, the room bore witness to what amounted to a deafening silence, a silence which bore no answers. However, investigators clung to hope that someone somewhere held a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of knowledge that could bring justice to the victim's memory. Detective Daly would implore with anyone who had even the faintest suspicion, no matter how trivial, to come forward. Mere suspicion, he insisted, could be a vital clue. For Anton, Chaim's father, the torment of not knowing and having many within his community essentially sit on their hands weighed heavy on his heart. He grappled with the irrefutable fact that his son was gone and he would never come back. But his killer remained elusive. The unanswered questions festered in his mind, a source of deep unease. The foremost question which haunted him and the case was, why would anyone commit such a heinous act against a 15-year-old boy with no known enemies? In the midst of this investigation, a single significant clue emerged. A jogger, who would be a lone witness, claimed to have seen a young man who could have been a Yeshiva student a few blocks away from the school at 7 a.m., just moments before Chaim's lifeless body was discovered. Yet all efforts to identify this mysterious student yielded not a fragment of information. Unfortunately, even with a clue, it seems that investigators had reached a dead end. The fact that the case had all but halted had left Anton Weiss to become a relentless investigator in his own right, embarking on a quest for answers that mirrored the tireless efforts of law enforcement. His tactics would include taking it upon himself to delve deeper into his son's life, seeking solace in the accounts of former rabbis and classmates of his son. Armed with lists and records chronicling the lives of the Yeshiva students, he embarked on a mission to unearth the truth that lay beneath. Eventually, in the pursuit for truth, a $15 million wrongful death lawsuit against the Yeshiva itself would manifest. In this lawsuit, the family leveled grievous accusations claiming that the Yeshiva bore responsibility for their son's death due to their neglect, recklessness, and carelessness. The father pointed to a broken back door as evidence of neglect, a breach in security that left the dormitory vulnerable. The absence of a dormitory counselor on that fateful night further fueled his claims. However, the lawsuit was not solely about seeking monetary compensation. Anton maintained that it was a legal tool designed to compel the Yeshiva officials to cooperate fully in the ongoing investigation. His intentions became clear when he declared his intent to donate any potential winnings to charity, as Chaim's family and friends rallied. Determined to bring justice for the slain boy, a reward of $100,000 was offered. This sum was intended to inspire individuals with information to come forward, and to break the silence that had shrouded the case for far too long. As an army of 25 dedicated detectives toiled tirelessly on this perplexing puzzle, working full-time for months on end, a police mobile command center, which was a beacon of hope, stood silent sentinel outside the Yeshiva, an open invitation for anyone to come forward with any information they had. Eventually, a solitary strand of hair, a cryptic clue in a sea of uncertainty, was discovered near where Chaim's lifeless body had been. This minuscule fragment did not belong to the victim, and it stood as a potential key in unlocking the identity of the killer. However, investigators would tread cautiously, refraining from carelessly conducting a DNA test until suspects emerged, fearing irrevocable damage to the fragile lead due to the limitations of DNA testing technology at the time. The chilling revelation from an FBI profiler added yet another layer of complexity to this tapestry. The profiler suggested that the killer was no stranger to the young boy, and pointed to a peer as a potential suspect. Said profiler implied a deeply personal connection, one tinged with emotions that fueled the heinous act. A sinister specter of jealousy potentially looming over the case, involving what appeared to be a highly intelligent yet criminally unsophisticated perpetrator. Eventually, Anton Weiss, the grieving father, would express a disappointment in the Nassau Police Department's handling of the case. His fervent plea for an appointment of a special prosecutor would go unanswered, leaving him grappling with unanswered questions in a quest for justice. Much later, in the spring of 2013, a glimmer of hope pierced the veil of uncertainty in this case. Forensic evidence was scrutinized with meticulous detail, and over 100 former students were interviewed. Yet, as the calendar turned to October 2015, investigators once more stood at an impasse. Even though renewed resources and interest in the case had risen, they could find little to no evidence to move the case further along. Later in November 2017, Chaim Weiss, the grief-stricken father, bared his soul to the world in an interview with news station PIX11. His profound unease stemmed from the fact that his son had been assigned a solitary room while his peers had been grouped in duos or trios. Later, the same news station which interviewed the still grieving father would reach out to Rabbi Cooper, hoping to unveil the secrets surrounding this case. However, their efforts were met with silence and evasion. Rabbi Cooper offered no answers regarding the case and displayed a clear reluctance to engage in discussion about it. Eventually, PIX11 would receive a call from a former student, a witness, or so they claimed, of the horrors of the past. This student had attended the Yeshiva prior to the slaying in the years 1976 and 1977, where he would state that he endured physical abuse at the hands of one rabbi, a litany of assaults that included punches, kicks, twisted ears, and he claimed that the blame was squarely on Rabbi Cooper's feet, accusing him of permitting such atrocities to persist, and positing that this could have been what had led to Chaim's death. However, even with these new leads, little movement has occurred in this case, so it appears that in the heart of this harrowing enigma, the tragic tale of Chaim Weiss remains a mystery abound, from the midnight murder to the unsettling shadows that still remain within the hallowed halls of the Yeshiva. Investigators still persist in a quest for answers that has been marked by a mosaic of cryptic clues and chilling coincidences, leaving them and the family yearning for a final flourish of truth to pierce the perplexing pale that shrouds this case. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.